Okay, so we found something really interesting.
Yeah.
It's this report. And basically, it's all about how federal judges are like pushing back against the Trump administration, you know, and their policies. What really caught our eye was this one judge who apparently told the DOJ lawyers straight up, "You must think I'm an idiot."
Wow.
That's pretty wild, right?
Yeah, that's a bold statement.
So we're going to do a deep dive today looking into that whole thing.
Right.
We've got reporting from NBC News about how judges are getting more and more frustrated with the administration.
Right.
And then we've also got this transcript from a YouTube video by Glenn Kirshner.
Okay.
He's breaking down a really important court opinion.
Interesting.
Our mission today is to figure out, like, what were the main arguments in this case?
Yeah.
And what was the judge's reasoning? Because this case is a big deal.
Absolutely.
The NBC News report highlighted a bunch of different instances where judges were, like, really pushing back.
Oh, yeah.
So one judge said the DOJ was using a sledgehammer to hit a fly. Another judge called out Elon Musk for his social media posts. And there was another one who said they were very offended by something the Department of Agriculture did.
Wow.
Plus, there was a judge who blocked some EPA stuff related to climate grants.
Interesting.
So it seems like judges are becoming more willing to, like, stand up to the administration.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
It looks like there's a pattern here where people argue against inclusion by saying that marginalized groups are dangerous.
Right.
Even if there's no evidence to back that up.
Yeah, that's a common tactic, unfortunately.
And this case seems to be another example of that.
I think you're right.
So these examples from NBC News show us how judges are pushing back in different areas.
Okay.
And that leads us to Judge Anna Reyes.
Right.
And she issued what's called a preliminary injunction. For those who don't know, a preliminary injunction is basically a court order that stops something from happening.
Got it.
In this case, it stopped the Defense Department from putting Trump's executive order into action, the one that banned transgender people from the military.
Right, right.
Judge Reyes's main finding was pretty straightforward.
Okay, what was it?
She said that the ban was soaked in animus.
Wow.
And that it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution.
I see.
Basically, the Constitution says everyone has to be treated equally under the law.
Right.
And she argued that the ban was discrimination based on both transgender status and sex.
So she was very clear that this ban was discriminatory.
Yeah, soaked in animus. That's some pretty strong language coming from a federal judge.
Yeah, no kidding.
And the transcript we have really highlights some of the powerful phrases she used in her opinion.
Like what?
She didn't hold back at all. She called the language of the ban unabashedly demeaning.
Oof.
And she said the policy stigmatizes transgender persons as inherently unfit.
Wow.
She even said that the government's conclusions bear no relation to fact.
So basically she's saying they're just making things up.
It seems like she thought the policy was based on prejudice and not on any real evidence.
That's a pretty harsh assessment.
Yeah, and what's behind those strong statements is her assessment of the evidence or lack thereof.
What do you mean?
Judge Reyes criticized the administration because they didn't provide any real data about the number of transgender service members.
Okay.
And more importantly, they didn't show how being transgender actually affects military readiness.
Interesting.
It's like they were making these huge generalizations without doing any research.
Yeah, that's not a good look.
The transcript mentions that Judge Reyes pointed out that transgender people have been serving openly since 2021. But the Trump administration's lawyers, the defendants in this case, apparently didn't even bother to look at their service records.
Oh, wow.
That's a pretty big oversight.
Yeah, it is.
She even said, and this is a really powerful quote, transgender persons can have the warrior ethos, physical and mental health selflessness, honor, integrity, and discipline to ensure military excellence.
She's directly addressing their arguments there.
Yeah, and she didn't just say it. She pointed to the service records of the transgender military members who were the plaintiffs in the case.
Okay.
She called them Exhibit A.
Makes sense.
That's a pretty direct challenge to the administration's claims.
For sure.
Now, the transcript also mentions that the government tried to change their argument a little bit.
Oh, so?
They said the ban was really about people with gender dysphoria.
Okay.
Which is when someone feels distress because their biological sex and their gender identity don't match.
Right.
So they were trying to say it wasn't about all transgender people, just those with gender dysphoria.
I see.
How did Judge Reyes respond to that?
Well, she wasn't convinced. She brought up a tweet from then Defense Secretary Pete Heggs, where he said that transgender troops were disqualified from service without an exemption.
Right.
Her point was that the administration was saying one thing publicly, but then their lawyers were trying to argue something different in court.
Like they were trying to trick her or something. And this is where that famous quote from the judge comes in.
The idiot quote.
Exactly. She said, "I am not going to abide by government officials saying one thing to the public and coming in here to the court and telling me something different like I'm an idiot. I am not an idiot." You can really hear the frustration in her voice.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
It seems like she thought they weren't being honest with her at all.
Right.
And it reminds me of that sledgehammer comment from the other judge. It seems like judges are getting fed up with this kind of behavior.
That makes sense.
So to be clear for everyone, the case was officially called Nicholas Talbot et al., representing the transgender military members, versus the United States et al., which basically means Donald Trump's Secretary Heggs and the DOJ lawyers.
Got it.
So let's break down the administration's argument. What was their main reason for this executive order in the first place?
Well, they kept saying they were prioritizing military excellence and readiness. And they argued that service by transgender persons is inconsistent with this mission because they lack the requisite warrior ethos to achieve military excellence.
So basically they were saying that transgender people can't be good soldiers.
That was their argument, yes.
And then Secretary Heggs' policy made that official, right?
Right. It disqualified transgender troops from serving unless they got an exemption.
It sounds like they put the executive order and the policy into place pretty quickly.
They did.
And Judge Reyes pointed out that this kind of argument has been used before to discriminate against other groups.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she mentioned racial minorities, women in combat roles, and gay people in the military. She was saying that people have used military readiness as an excuse to discriminate for a long time.
That's a good point.
And she argued that the military has actually gotten stronger because of inclusion.
Interesting.
So what was the argument from the transgender military members?
They said they're just the latest group to be discriminated against when it comes to military service. They argued that the ban and the language used in the Heggs policy was derogatory and targeted them unfairly.
I see.
And they said that violated their rights under the Fifth Amendment.
Okay, so how did the DOJ lawyers respond to that?
Well, they basically doubled down on the military readiness argument. But they made some pretty sweeping claims without any evidence.
Like what?
They said that transgender people would undermine military readiness unit, cohesion, good order, and discipline.
Wow.
They even said that being transgender goes against core military values like readiness, lethality, cohesion, honesty, humility, uniformity, and integrity.
That's a lot of big words.
Yeah.
It sounds like they were throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck.
Kind of.
They also said without any evidence that gender ideology activists don't care about military requirements.
Okay.
And that transgender military members cost too much.
Interesting.
Those are some serious accusations.
They are.
But the transcript also talks about the evidence that the transgender military members presented.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
They had a really impressive record of service.
Okay. Tell me more.
Judge Reyes pointed out that they had over 130 years of combined service in all kinds of important roles.
Like what?
Senior military science instructors, artillery platoon commanders, intelligence analysts, satellite operators, naval flight officers.
Well, they've done it all.
Yeah, and they had been deployed all over the world.
Where to?
Places like Afghanistan, Poland, Korea, Iraq, Kuwait. And they served on ships like the USS Ronald Reagan and the USS George W. Bush.
That's amazing.
And they had earned over 80 commendations, including Bronze Stars and Global War on Terrorism Service medals.
So not only were they serving, but they were excelling.
Exactly. They weren't just entry-level personnel either. They
Right.
had positions of responsibility, and they had consistently performed really well.
Their service really highlights how impactful this policy is.
Yeah, and how important Judge Reyes' decision was.
For sure.
So what did the DOJ lawyers say about all that evidence?
They basically said the court should ignore those individual service records. Yeah. And they said the court should just defer to the military's judgment about who's fit to serve.
So they were saying the military knows best.
That was their argument.
But Judge Reyes wasn't so quick to accept that, was she?
No, she wasn't.
She questioned whether that military judgment was actually based on any real evidence.
Good for her.
She kept pointing out that there was no proof that the military had even talked to their own leaders before making this decision.
Okay.
And neither the executive order nor the policy had any analysis or data to back up their claims.
Wow.
And, get this, the Trump administration's lawyers admitted that their claims about transgender people lacking honor, truthfulness, or discipline were just pure conjecture.
Wait, they admitted that?
Yeah, they said it right there in court.
That's a huge concession.
It is, and it really undermines their whole argument.
For sure.
The transcript actually includes this exchange where Judge Reyes asked the DOJ lawyer if it was demeaning to say that being transgender means you can't be honorable or disciplined. And the lawyer wouldn't answer the question directly.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And they also had to admit that there weren't any studies to support those claims.
So they were just making things up, basically.
It seems like it.
Wow.
And then there's this action memo that was supposed to be the basis for the ban.
Okay, what about that?
Judge Reyes really pressed them on this memo. It claimed that they looked at 3 studies and some cost data before making their recommendations.
Right.
But the DOJ lawyers couldn't even say who had actually reviewed that information.
Oh, come on.
And one of the studies was 8 years old, and the other 2 actually supported the transgender military members' side.
So the evidence they were using actually proved them wrong.
Exactly. It's like they didn't even read the studies.
That's unbelievable.
Judge Reyes also pointed out again that the government hadn't looked at the service records of openly transgender people since 2021.
Even though they had been serving openly for years at that point.
Right. It's like they were intentionally ignoring the evidence.
It really seems that way.
It's clear that this policy wasn't based on objective data or analysis.
Yeah, it seems like something else was going on.
But maybe the most damning part of the whole case was when the DOJ lawyers made a series of admissions.
Oh, what were those?
They actually agreed that transgender military members are mentally and physically fit to serve.
Wow.
And they agreed that these individuals have served honorably and met all the standards.
So they're acknowledging that they're good soldiers.
Yeah, and they even admitted that these transgender service members have made America safer.
But they still wanted to discharge them.
Exactly. They couldn't give a good reason why they should be discharged or why others shouldn't be allowed to enlist.
That makes no sense.
I know. It's like they were arguing against themselves.
Yeah, it really is.
And on top of that, the transgender military members presented statements from actual military leaders.
Okay.
And these leaders said that readiness recruiting and unit cohesion had actually improved since transgender people started serving openly in 2021.
So they were directly contradicting the administration's claims.
Yeah, they specifically said there weren't any problems with pronouns or any kind of existential crisis in the military.
Interesting.
So Judge Reyes had a lot of reasons to grant the preliminary injunction.
What was her legal reasoning?
She said the transgender military members had shown they were likely to win the case.
Okay.
And she said they would be irreparably harmed if the ban was allowed to go into effect.
Because it would violate their constitutional rights.
Right. And she also said that the balance of equities and the public interest were both in favor of the injunction.
It makes sense.
She even said that she thought the ban would fail no matter what level of legal scrutiny was applied.
Wow.
That means she thought the government's argument was really weak.
It sounds like it.
And she ended her opinion by talking about the cruel irony of transgender service members risking their lives to defend the same rights that the ban was trying to take away from them.
That's a really powerful point.
It is. So to sum it all up, a federal judge carefully looked at all the evidence, and she decided that the Trump administration's policy banning transgender people from the military was discriminatory.
Okay.
And she said it wasn't based on any real evidence and was probably unconstitutional.
Got it.
And she made it clear that transgender people have served successfully and honorably.
Which goes against everything the administration was saying.
Exactly.
It's amazing how Judge Reyes was able to dismantle their arguments.
Yeah, and her strong language combined with the DOJ's own admissions really makes you think.
What do you mean?
It seems like this policy was based on prejudice and not on any actual concerns about the military.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I want to leave you with a question to think about. What does this ruling say about the balance of power between the president, the military, and the rights of individuals?
That's a really important question.
It is, and it's something we all need to consider carefully.